Hello, PitView traders, and welcome back to our next video in our series, GroupView Basics, which essentially covers the second step in our PitView three-step process for analyzing currencies. Again, this is the PitView Education Series, and I am your instructor, your host with the most, if you will, Mr. Steve Nurre. Now, just to review what we learned in the last lesson, which was the first step in the PitView process, we went through a little of the basics on global view. And again, I think you're finding at this point that it's actually it's a very simple process. You've got to embrace the simplicity of PitView and what it's doing for you. Essentially, with global view, we were looking at individual currencies to try to find and ranking them from strongest to weakest to try to find what we call the in-play currency. Some people might call this the driver. This is the currency that's either driving overall strength and overall weakness in the market. Meaning it's either strong against all the other currencies or most of them, or it's weak against all the other currencies. And this is a crucial step in Forex trading because one common mistake that a lot of traders make is that they don't trade the right pairs. They don't trade the pairs that are in the forefront of the market or the currencies that are in the forefront of the market that are the most actively traded for their time frame. To understand group view, this is just the second step of our process, and you're going to find this is very simple. It's a very simple next step in the process. After we have found the in-play currency, the individual currency that's showing a lot of strength or a lot of weakness versus other pairs, now it's time to take a closer look and rank that individual currency to see how it's trading in all the pairs that we look at. So we're going to rank it from strongest to weakest against all the other pairs. A good way to explain this is if you recall in our previous video when we looked at the Japanese yen, which was the first step in our three-step process. I went through the basics of comparison analysis, of how you do comparison analysis on your charts when you pull up all the currencies, and we established in that previous video that the Japanese yen was very strong. And that's essentially what Global View is doing for you, only instead of showing you it based on what's on the charts, it's actually showing you based on liquidity providers, market makers, which currencies are the most well bid from an activity and volume standpoint from the liquidity providers. So looking at this as a whole is what Global View does for us. But if you look at all these individual charts on here, you'll see that the extent of the trend on the Japanese yen, when you're looking at charts, the yen is very strong as far as the extent or slope of the trend versus some currencies versus in comparison to some others. For example, if you look at the slope of the trend on the pound yen, it's certainly not as powerful or as extreme as the slope of the trend versus New Zealand or versus Aussie in this case over this time frame. So what Group View is going to do for us is it's going to do exactly what we just talked about. It's going to measure which currency pairs, even though we know the yen is strong, which currencies is it strongest against and versus which ones it's weakest against. So it's just going to take a closer snapshot. So just to review a bit, since we are going through the three-step process, our first step in our process was to check Global View. And again, going back to our previous video, we check Global View, we try to find the strongest or weakest currency. Now in this case, I'm looking at a 1 hour time frame for my examples. Your question right now might be, well, Steve, what time frames do I use? Don't worry, we're going to get there. We have to know the theory behind it first before we can narrow down individual time frames, but 1 hour just tends to be a common time frame that I personally trade. So we would check Global View to find the strongest or weakest currency. And in this case, in the previous video, we obviously found that the Japanese yen was strong. So now that we know the Japanese yen is the strongest bid currency or the most well-bid currency from a buy and sell imbalance standpoint, all we're going to do is we'll double-click on the JPY at the top of the screen because now we want to take a closer look at the Japanese yen. We want to get a closer snapshot, if you will, of how it's trading against all the other currencies. And that's all you have to do to pull up Group View is just double click on the Japanese yen, and this is the screen that's going to come up. It's going to be our Group View screen. Now what Group View is going to do is it's going to rank all the Japanese yen pairs from strongest to weakest. And again, showing you which currencies it's trading the strongest against versus which currencies it's trading the weakest against. Basically showing you kind of the slope of how strong that trend is. As you can see here, when we look at the top of the screen, we see that the Japanese yen is strongly bid against New Zealand. Now this would be bearish for the New Zealand yen pair. The group view screen, what it does is it's going to place the yen as the base currency in all these pairs because we are measuring the bid and ask prices versus all these pairs to show you the buy and sell imbalance. So now that we know that the JPY has been strongly bid against New Zealand, we already know from global view that the yen is strong, and now from a group view standpoint, we know that the yen is strongest, or it's being the most well bid or buy imbalance from a liquidity provider standpoint against the New Zealand dollar. This is where most traders would start pulling up their charts. You know, you check the global view to find the strongest to weakest currency. You check the group view to find the strongest to weakest currency pair. And this is where we might go to a chart to see, okay, well, let's take a closer look at that New Zealand yen chart. When we take a closer look, we see that it's hitting right next to a horizontal support level. And just to review what we've gone through so far, New Zealand yen is trading at a horizontal support level. Global view shows a strong yen. Group view shows the yen is strongly bid against New Zealand, and the New Zealand yen pair is trading right next to a horizontal support level. So what would come next from here? Well, now we're starting to talk about trade opportunities that exist. Now we would take a closer look to actually find an entry point possibly for a possible trade opportunity. But you see how everything's kind of lining up in our favor just by going through those first two steps in the process. So to summarize group view, it complements the three-step process by showing you the details of the individual currency pairs. Again, ranking them from strongest to weakest. And again, that's not so hard, correct? It's just 1-2 steps. Strongest currency, and then we look for the strongest to weakest currency pairs. Now to look at the next steps in the process, obviously step 1 was global view, picking a currency. Step 2, which we just went through, which is extremely simple, which is picking a pair through group view, finding which pairs are the strongest to weakest for an individual currency. And then it would just be moving on to step 3, which is picking a trade opportunity. Embrace the simplicity of PitView. It's a simple yet powerful tool for you as a trader. So step 3, picking a trade opportunity, that brings us into what we call pair view, which is going to give us a more detailed look at picking our trade opportunities, analyzing and managing our trade. So coming up next in our next video, we're going to go through PitView Basics and wrap up the entire three-step process by putting it all together for you. So once again, I hope that was helpful. Again, embrace the simplicity. Don't overanalyze. Don't make things harder than where they are. I will see you on the next click of your mouse in our next video on PitView Basics and putting it all together. Once again, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me at steve.nurre@pitview.com. Thanks for coming in, and I'll see you in the next class.